When you watch Friends, you see six best friends who are always there for each other, always laughing, always supporting one another. But what you don't see is what was happening behind the cameras. What you don't see is the tension, the arguments, the egos clashing, the personal demons affecting the show, and the moments when these cast members genuinely didn't want to be around each other. The truth is that Friends had some serious behind-the-scenes drama that almost tore the show apart multiple times. There were feuds that lasted seasons. There were cast members who didn't trust each other. There were conflicts so intense that producers had to step in and mediate. And some of that drama was so dark that it affected not just the show, but the cast members' personal lives and mental health. In this video, we're uncovering the real feuds, the real fights, and the real drama that happened off camera on the set of Friends. And trust me, this stuff is way more dramatic than anything that happened on the show itself. Let's start with Matthew Perry, because his behind-the-scenes story is actually heartbreaking when you really understand it. Matthew was dealing with serious depression and addiction issues while playing the funniest character on the show. And here's the thing that nobody really talks about. The other cast members didn't always know the full extent of what he was going through. Matthew struggled silently for years. He would show up to set, he would deliver his lines, he would make people laugh, and then he would go home and deal with his personal demons. But there were times when his depression and addiction affected his performance. He would have bad days where he couldn't be as funny or as present. And instead of everyone rallying around him and understanding what was happening, there was tension. Some of the writers didn't understand why he was struggling. Some of the cast members didn't know how to help. There were moments where Matthew felt isolated, even though he was surrounded by people. He's talked in interviews about how he felt like nobody really knew the real Matthew. Everyone knew Chandler, but they didn't know Matthew, the person. What makes this situation even more complicated is that Matthew's addiction and depression were serious medical issues, but the entertainment industry at that time didn't have the mental health support systems it has now. Matthew was expected to show up and be perfect every single day, no matter what he was dealing with internally. And when he couldn't be perfect, when he had an off day, when his addiction affected his work, there was tension and frustration. It's not that the cast members were bad people or that they didn't care about Matthew. It's that nobody really understood how serious his struggles were. Eventually, over the years, especially after the show ended, Matthew became more open about his addiction and depression. And the cast members rallied around him. They supported him through his recovery. But during the show, there was definitely a distance, a lack of understanding, a tension that made Matthew's personal struggle even harder. Now, let's talk about Jennifer Aniston and David Schwimmer, because their relationship is actually a fascinating study in how two people with completely different personalities had to learn to work together. Early in Friends, David was very serious. He had gone to Northwestern for theater. He was trained in method acting. He took his craft incredibly seriously. And Jennifer, meanwhile, was more free-spirited, more willing to experiment, more focused on having fun on set. The tension between them was real. David would sometimes make comments about how Jennifer's approach wasn't serious enough. Jennifer would get frustrated with David's intensity. They didn't understand each other. Their acting styles clashed. Their personalities clashed. And that created genuine friction on set. But here's what's beautiful about this conflict. Over time, they learned to appreciate each other. They learned that David's seriousness brought depth to the show, and Jennifer's energy brought lightness. They learned that they could be different and still work together beautifully. David has talked about how he eventually realized that comedy requires a certain kind of freedom and that Jennifer's approach was legitimate and valuable. Jennifer has talked about how she appreciated David's commitment to the craft, even when it frustrated her at the time. By the later seasons, they had genuine affection for each other. They understood what the other person was bringing to the show. So their conflict wasn't about them being bad people or not caring about each other. It was about two different personalities having to figure out how to work together. And they succeeded. They turned their differences into strengths. Courteney Cox had her own set of challenges on Friends that created tension behind the scenes. Courteney struggled with anxiety and perfectionism on set. She was obsessed with getting everything right. She wanted every line to be perfect. She wanted to understand her character completely. And sometimes this perfectionism created tension with the other cast members. There were moments where Courteney would want to do multiple takes to get a scene exactly right, and other cast members wanted to move on. There were times where she would be anxious about her performance, and instead of opening up about it, she would isolate herself. She's talked about how she struggled with self-doubt during certain seasons of the show. And instead of talking to the cast about it, she would deal with it internally, which sometimes created distance between her and the others. What's important to understand about Courteney's situation is that her anxiety and perfectionism came from a deep place of caring about the show and the character. She wasn't being difficult for the sake of being difficult. She genuinely wanted Monica to be perfect, and she was struggling with whether she was capable of delivering that. In interviews, Courteney has talked about how she had to learn to let go of perfectionism and trust in the process. She had to learn that good enough was actually good enough, and she had to learn to communicate her anxieties to the cast instead of isolating herself. By the later seasons, she had worked through a lot of this, and her relationships with the cast strengthened significantly. But during the middle seasons, there was definitely tension created by her perfectionism and anxiety. Lisa Kudrow's story is actually kind of a happy conflict story because it shows how Lisa had to fight for her character and eventually won. In the early seasons of Friends, the writers didn't really understand how to write for Phoebe. They saw her as the weird character, the odd one out. And Lisa, who has a background in improv and a unique comedic sensibility, knew that Phoebe could be so much more than that. She knew that Phoebe's weirdness should be celebrated and explored, not just used as a punchline. So Lisa started fighting with the writers. She would push back on storylines. She would suggest different directions for Phoebe. She would defend the character and say, "This is how Phoebe should be." And at first, the writers didn't always listen. There was tension between Lisa and the writing staff, but Lisa didn't give up. She kept pushing. She kept advocating for Phoebe, and eventually the writers listened. They started writing Phoebe the way Lisa wanted her to be written, and Phoebe became one of the most beloved characters on the show. What's beautiful about Lisa's story is that it shows the importance of speaking up for yourself and fighting for what you believe in. Lisa could have just accepted the way the writers wanted to write Phoebe, but she didn't. She fought. And that fight created some tension behind the scenes, but ultimately it made the character better and made the show better. Lisa's willingness to be difficult in service of her character is actually admirable. She wasn't being difficult for attention. She was being difficult because she believed in something. And she was right. Phoebe is now one of the most iconic characters in Friends history, and that's in large part because Lisa fought for her. Matt LeBlanc's behind-the-scenes story is about ego and money and feeling undervalued. Matt played Joey, and Joey was often relegated to being the funny, dumb character. Joey didn't always get the juiciest storylines. Joey's character development was sometimes limited compared to the other characters. And Matt felt this. He felt like he wasn't getting the same quality material that the other cast members were getting. So he started pushing back. He demanded equal pay with the other cast members. He pushed for better storylines for Joey. He wanted Joey to be taken seriously as a character, not just used for comic relief. And these demands created tension. Some of the cast members and producers felt like Matt was being demanding. But Matt was just advocating for himself and his character. He was saying, "I deserve to be taken seriously, just like everyone else." What's interesting about Matt's situation is that it shows the real world of Hollywood, where money and status and who gets the best roles matter a lot. Matt wasn't wrong to demand equal pay. He wasn't wrong to push for better material, but his pushiness also created tension with the cast. Some people felt like he was being ungracious or difficult. Some people felt like he was causing drama, but Matt was just trying to protect his interests and his career. In later seasons, Matt seemed more distant from the cast, more separate, and some people speculate that this is because of the tension he had created with his demands. But it could also be that Matt was just protecting himself emotionally after feeling undervalued for so long. David Schwimmer's behind-the-scenes situation was different from everyone else's. David was so committed to being a serious actor that sometimes his commitment actually worked against him on the set of a comedy show. David would approach scenes with such intensity, with such method acting focus, that sometimes he would miss the comedy in the moment. The other cast members would want to have fun and experiment, and David would want to do it exactly the right way. David was also dealing with his own personal struggles during the show. He was dealing with depression. He was dealing with the pressure of being the lead character on the biggest show on television. And sometimes those personal struggles manifested as tension on set. He could be moody. He could be intense. He could make the set feel less fun and more serious than other cast members wanted it to be. But what's important to understand about David is that his seriousness and intensity actually brought something valuable to the show. Ross became the emotional core of Friends because David played him with such depth and sincerity. The show needed that balance. It needed David's seriousness to counteract the comedy of the other characters. Over time, David learned how to bring his seriousness to the role while also enjoying the process more. He learned how to be playful while still taking the work seriously. And by the later seasons, David was much more integrated with the cast. But there were definitely seasons where his intensity and his personal struggles created friction. One of the most important things to understand about all of this behind-the-scenes drama is that none of it means the cast didn't care about each other. These weren't bad people fighting because they didn't like each other. These were 6 incredibly talented people dealing with the pressure of being on the biggest show on television, dealing with personal struggles, dealing with egos and insecurities, dealing with different working styles and personalities. And sometimes that created conflict. Sometimes that created tension. But ultimately, they all showed up and did the work. They all contributed to making one of the greatest TV shows of all time. What's also important to understand is that a lot of the behind-the-scenes drama was never publicized at the time because the studios and producers worked hard to keep these stories under wraps. They wanted people to believe that the cast got along perfectly. They wanted the narrative to be that these 6 people were real friends who genuinely loved each other. And in many ways, that narrative was true. But it was also incomplete. The cast did develop real friendships, especially over time. But they also had conflicts. They also had moments where they didn't like each other. They also had personal struggles that affected their work. The truth is more complicated than either extreme. The truth is that they were real people dealing with real conflict in a very high-pressure situation. And somehow, despite all that conflict, they created something magical. If there's one overarching lesson from the behind-the-scenes drama of Friends, it's this: even the best working relationships have conflict. Even the people who create amazing art together don't always get along. Even on the most successful show in television history, there were tension, drama, egos, insecurities, and personal struggles. That's just part of being human. That's just part of being in a workplace with other humans. What matters is how you handle that conflict. Do you talk about it? Do you work through it? Do you learn from it? Do you eventually move past it? And that's what the Friends cast did. They worked through their conflicts. They learned from their tensions. And they created something that has lasted for decades and will continue to impact culture for generations to come. The cast members themselves have talked about how much they've grown and learned from their time together. In interviews, they've discussed the conflicts and how those conflicts actually made them better at their jobs. Jennifer has talked about how David's seriousness pushed her to be a better actress. David has talked about how Jennifer's freedom and willingness to experiment helped him loosen up. Matthew has talked about how the cast's eventual understanding and support of his struggles was crucial to his recovery. Courteney has talked about how learning to let go of perfectionism made her a better collaborator. Lisa has talked about how fighting for her character made her a better advocate for herself. And Matt has talked about how his push for recognition eventually helped him value himself more. What's beautiful about looking at all of this behind-the-scenes drama is that we get to see that even the most successful, the most talented, the most beloved people in the world are dealing with real human struggles. They're dealing with insecurities. They're dealing with depression and addiction and anxiety and perfectionism. They're dealing with ego and money and feeling undervalued. They're dealing with different personalities and working styles. And somehow, despite all of that, they create something amazing. The conflict doesn't diminish what they created. If anything, the conflict is part of what made what they created so special, because they had to work through their differences. They had to learn from each other. They had to push each other to be better. The behind-the-scenes drama of Friends teaches us something really important about how great art gets made. It doesn't come from perfect harmony. It comes from real people with real conflicts learning how to work together despite those conflicts. It comes from people being willing to push each other and challenge each other and disagree with each other in service of creating something great. The cast of Friends didn't get along perfectly off camera, but what they did do was show up every single day and create something beautiful. And that's what really matters. That's what has lasted. That's what will continue to impact people for generations to come. Subscribe to Celeb Truth for more Friends cast analysis, behind-the-scenes stories, drama breakdowns, and the real truth about what happened on the set of your favorite show. In our next video, we're diving deep into the Friends cast's most shocking moments and revelations that surprised everyone. And trust me, some of these moments will change how you think about the show forever. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Drop a comment below and let us know which behind-the-scenes drama shocked you the most. Did you know about these conflicts? Which cast member's story surprised you? Let's discuss in the comments. Thanks, Celeb Truth family, and see you next time.